increases deployment of troops in Afghanistan on the condition the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan demonstrates progress in its corruption reform efforts. Contention 1 is corruption. The Afghan government is bashing corruption and non-established corruption is necessary for the domestic implosion and for future reforms. Not like in 7, half all Western nations now shows needed officials to share driving on the population to reform farmers, enforcement, deadlines, the cops, and shortages of the country government now faces the aggressive legitimacy of realization of Afghan government will happen must start at the top of anti-corruption drive might involve profile prosecution, free market offenders, and allowed state officials are actual laws that parties and blocking the have those making an example of the corrupt will not undermine but undercut but strengthening conditioning future assistance on these reforms is critical to ensure that resources are being effectively used. There in 7 administrative interiors according to corrupt the absence of the reform will police will affect resource will be wasted car states that lack of political concrete action donor church and assistance conditional and comprehensive top-down reform political strategy should be maintained pressure progress support corruption with serious undermining legitimacy of the cars like government reform is first and foremost a political task requiring carefully designed political strategies in the support of the international community. They'll say yes, Afghanistan has empirically responded to conditional troop deployments, good hand, and said 7 Netherlands conditions both in southern provinces under removal sending governor community to corrupt officials and regarding governor of Helmand both conditions were met and Karzai wants troops law. In 6, the government of the Karzai has requested a large use presence to assist maintain security and conditional assistance issues that unconditional assistance the condition unit penalty prevents conflict and instability even if performs on solve. Good hand, and Sector 7 don't writing 8 continuously not there and top politically neutral the evidence from against and shows that aids the blank check those political tensions and conflicts warning disorder accountability relations undermine the legitimacy and the scope of broad-based coalition reform programs based on leadership precipitated violent resistance and conditions create the institutional framework that is necessary for pushing future reforms. Good hand, and Sector 7 pushing the word of peace transition has that a range of effectively intensity from the system that remains according to the sort of capacity and the institutional framework this character always has to believe that donors have a short attention span conditionalities around conflict with of conditionalities and an opportunity to build alliances around common goals. There's a strong constituency for the right kind of conditionalities within the Afghan government. The intention 2 is instability. 2007 will make or break Afghanistan despite a growing uncertainty. The U.S. has the ability to turn the tide. Bergen in 7 and 2010 will make Europe for Afghanistan failure to be I will say will help encourage these territories to the U.S. Afghanistan Muslim like Iraq is to reconstruction efforts and the syndicate economic government deeply unpopular American presence is welcomed by the vast majority. And White House commitment to Afghanistan is questionable at best despite recent efforts. There is still a perception that the U.S. is not committed. Road 7. Statements from the White House says the support of Afghanistan will welcome consulting against minor problems for the moment and pushing the scarce intelligence people starting efforts with Iraq former American ambassadors to Afghanistan were more critical from the get-go. We didn't have enough money, we didn't have enough soldiers. I'm saying the same thing 6 years later. However, despite hopeful signs, the situation remains desperate. Absent more troops, instability will escalate into civil war during in Russia, Iran, India, and Pakistan, and exposure to terrorism. IHD 6. Failure to put more troops in Afghanistan will encourage the Taliban to greater left giving up natural also cause massive mobilization when the Afghan people have military regimes and future set use plans to the Taliban long time behind the West will walk away to be that house in Taliban, Russia, Iran, India will look for alternatives such as the army mobilization reform and civil war in Afghanistan will have devastating effects on the Palestinian hating Pakistani state which are already faced a full bonus efforts in Turkey but as Islamic institutions will be lost not in Iraq, Iran, or even the Palestinian territories, but in Afghanistan. It is here that Al-Qaeda wants to regroup and rearm itself. And Central Asian instability draws on great powers in this case nuclear war star. One without attending to the region, we run a major and most applications of the word for growth instability next not only about Russia, but China, or Iran, or India, all that much Russia plans and as their backyard believe nuclear power development has will create terrifying threats to world peace and instability spills over causing Middle Eastern war and Pakistani regime change to Toronto star 7 Afghanistan facing cancer related that the Islamic government system entire Pakistan should grab from lack of troops because of Afghanistan Pakistan goes down. You cannot stop a widening regional war that would become essentially a war between the Sunni and Shia right across the Middle East. And regime change causes India and Pakistan nuclear war. Risk 1. The process of Pakistan nuclear war from the Sunnis worse than Pakistan money needed to provoke a new war. The U.S. committed 25 war against each resulted in a nuclear war. Pakistan's government fell. Muslim governments might follow suit. And Indo-Pak nuclear war causes extinction. 5. 1. India and Pakistan wars can trigger nuclear weapons threatening the entire globe. And failure in Afghanistan precipitates costly anti-terrorist measures that terrorist attacks that wreck the global economy. Colucci 7. The Boston Afghanistan moving the U.S. has lost more terrorism to the world. Al-Qaeda and influence the U.S. economy. Afghanistan will be governed by Al-Qaeda to establish operations and technical communication to its accessibility of weapons can make even the poorest nation a threat to the world military crossing skills can weapons wreck having on any price stock market consumer confidence. Slam the brave today's global economic recovery impact of anti-terrorist network can have significant negative effect on global economy. Hinder flow of goods, immigration, restriction, preventing influx of knowledge, innovation through science leads to U.S. competitiveness. And Al-Qaeda will take over a dozen countries and transform them into nuclear launch sites for an attack on the U.S. The U.S. will be forced to multiple preemptive wars. Section 7. Terrorists will gain with massive social powers. Terrorists will have nuclear weapons. Terrorists will not make a weapon. They will be able to clean up from the bomb better. Al-Qaeda will become the government in a dozen countries. Terrorists will control countries in nature against radically a bunch of available growth manifold nations up first nuclear weapons. The U.S. will be starting preemptively. The U.S. might be unlikely to start attack American might witness the detonation of atomic bomb in a nuclear population and financial center, and the ensuing wars will end the world. Of course, C5 forward now we're talking about the terms of the first the Russians on American cities to be preemptive. China by initiating nuclear war on the U.S. with the president wants to decide to launch a nuclear strike on Iran itself. And NATO efforts are insufficient to solve the problem. U.S. action with NATO assaults and stability while providing a near multilateral solution to solve in Germany. That's sure. In 5. Once Afghanistan is cosmetic instability depends on the American military to range for a long-haul NATO structure to reveal the country's first money. NATO has stated from company and counter-insurgency operation. NATO has equals an internal consensus of the European left with help and legitimacy to U.S. efforts. This is the clever way the U.S. advantages to Germany the progress of post-war Afghanistan still rests and foremost in the reality of American power. And 10,000 troops are enough to ensure victory. Mackenzie and 7. Politically constrained military commanders are requesting leadership on 2,500 more troops. You don't have to join incremental steps to victory. You want to win this fight, minus percent at least an additional 10,000 troops. And American troops are a single commitment that is critical to solvency. No reactor is effective. Lantos 60 global stable Afghanistan is so greater than the risk of losing Afghanistan increasing with each state 50 years of small to Afghanistan long-term stability will be beyond question. The backyards of the international commitment is the number of international boots, and that's why American boots count the most because that the NATO units replacing U.S. troops in this is outwardly more than unprotected. It is important for the Afghan enemies to believe that America will remain there in strength. And such a gesture is critical to solving Rodi 6. The problems are rapid with a certain corruption acceptance among Afghans, Pakistanis, but American communities in Afghanistan with more than American will lead the hard business villages cooperation against the Taliban, not permanently unless when nuclear across the opening conflict Pakistan anticipated the day when all allies begin their caucus counter and influence experts said the U.S. needs to make a grand gesture to do something dramatic. Needs to convince people of that we're really committed and establishing security, safety, representative, nation building options. Tall 3. One of the first areas of successful nation building is stable security, absence of security, environment, nation building efforts provided with Brandon Paul, Lebanon, smaller examples of that, not those food-borne intervention, kind of easy, set country restructuring efforts for many civilian authorities performing their tasks if Afghanistan remains unproven certain external resources, no matter how large, will be ineffective. Contention 3 is U.S. hegemony. Commitment to Afghanistan's growth to repairing the trust deficit between the U.S. and other major powers that makes coalition building possible. Absent that, U.S. hegemony will not be sustainable. And votes up. And 3, a significant trust deficit between the U.S. and other major powers. The administration dealt with one chunk of American by demonstrating the willingness of the U.S. to use military force. However, the probability of commitments and gaps wide the program of Afghanistan raises question about America's commitment to provide less state relying coalition to deal with the potential threats such North Korea to implement solutions to the volatile conflict requires every country to believe that American assessments and promises are credible. The U.S. does not have the resources to cope with all the challenges of their defense and security. Cold War burden sharing model is breaking down. This points to the need for the administration to begin with a robust campaign to rebuild consensus and current U.S. troop levels are insufficient. Sending more is critical to credibility and global stability. Allied times and 7 U.S. is the person who can get global troops to class and Afghanistan. There's 40 U.S. credibility, global security, connectivity, and terrorism. This morning talk to be managing U.S. with the same things to make it inspired Afghanistan at the same time as retreating from the stalemate in Iraq. Success in Afghanistan will show that the West can be a respectful and healthy threat to Islamic country in which it has no oil or other economic interests. And committing troops to Afghanistan is critical to solving global threats in the long run. Soderbergh 2. For the world watch closely to see how serious the U.S. is committed to international missions. The world-based injustice and reviews would hit the ground. The U.S. presence would ensure that the U.S. is strong voice in other future stations to Washington fellows with the troops at risk facing the hard wherever the U.S. is fully fighting the gaps in Afghanistan resumes to point to the active reserves. U.S. forces are far from stressed with point American participation levers on development and leadership of other countries. And U.S. presence in Afghanistan is key to power projection and continues strategic competitors in the region. Shirk and Donnelly 5. Afghanistan is a great foothold for us. South East Asia's role in the Middle East. Afghanistan shared border with Iran, Pakistan, and China. 3 states that pose significant access problems to military. Having a stable space would help create pressure on our strategic competitors. And American leadership is vital to fighting global nuclear conflicts in every region. They're both taken. 7. The unipolar system compared to unqualified alternatives is all stable, less likely to make world nuclear powers. American dominance stands in the way of regression, something more dangerous. World is not American dominant over a world that looks like future international order reshaped by those who have the power to shape the Chinese are motivated to turn their nation to what they regard as critical position. Japan appears a market national choice for foreign policy being driven by blood of national resentment and ambition. India is engaging competition for China with predominance in the Indian Ocean. American power interference throughout which intensifying with U.S. dimension influence in the region. The other nations themselves abuse with as powers have done with path through confrontation and wars. Most powerful possession of weapons for making war putting catastrophic down embargoes would disrupt trade, stability, and possibly guarantee that the U.S. would step into any dangerous development on the continent and the multiple world that would not be possible without removing the danger of world war. Even other regional conflicts may erupt. They are more likely to the U.S. begins to withdraw from this position to create dominance in East Asia, motivation for American powers, stabilizing the region for balance. This could increase the likelihood of conflict involving Russia and its neighbors. And U.S. leadership in Asia solves nuclear war calls identified. When the U.S. will talk in the world, it likely to increase the capability trying to balance growing Chinese forces and still Russian forces that result in obstructions, including possible acquisition of nuclear weapons without shifting balance of power among Japan, Russia, China, Russia, potentially the regional powers such as India, Indonesia, and Mediterranean regions. The risk of defending before the U.S. would face the global war and the risk of world war even more catastrophic than last year's situation. The rise of the global hostile rivalry when the U.S. and the world avoid the global Cold War hot war and all its nuclear dangers. And success in Afghanistan transforms U.S. leadership. Lansford 3 is Washington interested in preventing the campaign against global terrorism. Action campaigns can be started at prelude to powerful defeat or at least contain those actors to undermine the stability of the contemporary unilateral international system. And finally, the U.S. must exercise realism in Afghanistan in order to prevent the formation of power vacuum, which will destroy the entire post-World War II power balance. Krauthammer 1. If the U.S. cannot succeed in defeating the world, then the entire structure will political will be system of American speaking that with Taliban and the world way to show American might will show fellow countries sitting on the other side of the world divided will grow. The current pro-American coalition will fall apart even more quickly than Taliban groups of national the U.S. entire world new global alignment is at stake. That coalition appears healthy that they're all respect for American power and ability to provide safety and American abroad. Should we succeed in the war in terrorism first, Afghanistan will be cementing new world order expansion of American security peace to include Russia and you with a more neutral China to guarantee a world peace with the last half century. We cannot succeed in the war self-defense against Afghanistan. The whole post-World War II structure, open border, open trade, open seas, open society will begin to unravel.
What's the role of balance?
I mean, we don't take a stance on that in the 1AC. We will argue
So
over that.
why should the judges vote out?
The judges should vote out because we think that it's a good idea to implement the policies outlined in the 1AC.
So basically the plan?
I mean, our interpretation will be that, Chris, you want to?
Yeah, the plan.
Okay. Oh, why do you focus on Afghanistan? Why is that the most important issue to discuss in this debate?
Our 1AC indicates that Afghanistan is one of the biggest issues in international politics, that it's imperative the U.S. intervene there, send more troops in order to solve scenarios for multiple
Why Afghanistan?
nuclear
Why not
wars.
like northern Pakistan or other places which
Well, the affirmative indirectly deals with Pakistan.
indirectly deals?
Yep.
Let's talk about that. How do you affect the Pakistani military regime that's occurring now? How does your plan force Pakistan to take a hardline stance against terrorism?
Well, our evidence says that right now the Pakistani regime is unstable, that if the Afghan government were to fall apart, if there were to be regime change which would occur without more U.S. support, it would be likely that there would be a regime change in Pakistan. Sorry?
What makes a nation unstable?
When there are insurgents, when there are people trying to kill civilians and mandate and enforce their rules and norms upon civilians.
So if someone's trying to kill civilians, that makes them.
Well, that would be the Taliban. If they force individuals into the drug trade, if they can't
Is
supply crops.
America a stable nation?
I mean, I'm not sure what your interpretation of stable is, but yeah,
Well,
I would say America is stable.
Okay. So how is it that we make a nation stable? How do you do that?
I don't understand why that's relevant to the plan. Our 1AC
Your
evidence.
whole point is bring stability to the Middle East. How do you do that?
Well, we send troops. That's how we bring stability to the Middle East.
And so sending
For
troops.
reconstruction efforts, for development.
So sending troops automatically makes things peaceful.
Our evidence isolates reasons why that's true. Yes.
Okay.
And it's warranted. It's not just a claim that we assert in our 1AC.
Okay. How does the 1AC essentially then basically make Afghanistan a nation state for?
Well, our evidence says that Afghanis trust and believe in the United States, and that they will cooperate with the United States, that the U.S. needs to be there to ensure that reconstruction projects like building highways, like supporting things for alternative crops, all of those things occur because when we don't have security, reconstruction
Why should Afghanistan want to become a nation state?
Because it's individuals. Our evidence says that the majority of the Afghani population want democracy. They want the same rights as the U.S.
How do you know that the Afghani people
Because there
want
have been polls and
democracy?
statistics that have said that the majority of
There's statistics.
Afghanistan.
What statistics?
I mean, we don't explicitly read. I think we read a card. It doesn't cite like a percentage, but we'll read more evidence on this.
Where do you get this information? Like, who's the one that's saying that the Afghanistan people?
Well, we asked
saying
One of the
they want
people, the
democracy?
World Bank, compiles statistics.
The World Bank compiles statistics. All right. How do you construct a secure environment?
We send troops. Troops solve. That's what we will defend throughout this round.
Right.
There are warranted reasons why troops solve instability in Afghanistan.
We just asked not to line our arguments up.
What is that?
We just asked not to line our arguments up. You can vote on separate.
Okay.
Sorry, you don't want to float next to other arguments?
Just not like-
correlated to.
Right.
Okay.
The essential task of oppositional intellectuals is to free themselves from the institutional role tradition has assigned them, to the role of the leading intellectual that renders them agents of the regime of truth, of a system of power that blocks, prohibits, and invalidates the knowledge and discourse of the oppressed faction, and more immediately, by way of annulling its specific occasion, the knowledge and discourse of the intellectual class. In terms of a version of Gramsci appropriate to the cultural and socio-political occasion in obtaining North America, they should recognize themselves in the institutional context in which they labor as but one site, however crucial, in the relay of unevenly developed, asymmetrical sites of repression. Their theoretical activity, therefore, must be seen as a local and regional praxis, but one at the same time conducted alongside those other blocks that struggle for power. The affiliative relay of disaffiliated constituencies disclosed by leaping into the hermeneutic circle, primordially and wholly, interestedly calls into question the oppositional project of the totalizing universal intellectual, yet it justifies the collaborative project of intellectuals in those different local and regional disciplines just as it links intellectuals as a class with those particular blocks. Workers, women, gays, blacks, ethnic minorities, and youth, whose struggle is activated by their own organic occasion, their own specific interest. William V. Spanos thus proleptically theorizes and powerfully criticizes the affirmative's topical politics. Importantly, though, Avery and I strongly agree with much of the 1AC, that is, with the fierce urgency of confronting the occasions that they delineate there and developing strategies that effectively respond to those intolerable situations. Nonetheless, we equally strongly disagree with many of the ways that they respond to the topical hail and proffer solutions in this room. Specifically, our alternatives to their implicit framing of the ballot and ordering of the judge spaces are collaboration and affiliation. Following Spanos, we foreground contemporary power relations in terms of a relay extending throughout the indissoluble continuum of being, from the ontological, the anthropologos, to the cultural, the discourse of man, to the economic and socio-political, the practices of consumer capitalism, patriarchy, and racism. Because we believe, as he explains, only such a transdisciplinary mode of critical thinking can enable effective resistance to and subversion of the neo-imperialism that masks itself in the hegemonic discourse of the New World Order. We also agree with his provisional articulation concerning the colleges and universities for whom we all debate, which are, above all, the locus of production of the hegemonic discourse overdetermined by the New World context, and incorporate his educational project vis-a-vis the intellectual, pedagogy, and the curriculum into this debate round and its specific topical occasion by basically treating the topic as a curriculum, your judge space and ballot as pedagogy, and our debating as intellectuals engaged in our theoretical activity as a local and regional praxis. Of course. These categories comprise our contestatory fiction for this debate and function as an indissoluble relay of affiliated sites, not rigid static concepts. That 1AC, despite all of its strong topical work, fails due to its disabling disciplinarity. The affirmative spontaneously consents to debate's insularity and dominant practices by agreeing to affirm the topic in itself, that is, as separate from all other related sites that struggle to inform the topic, this debate round, in our colleges and universities. They treat the topic, the Middle East, the federal government's ongoing errand in its wilderness, their specific 1AC occasion, and their role in this debate as a singular event that they need to debate. Of course they realize that these consist of many separate events, but they affirm the topic as if its many particular sites could be separated, frozen, and considered as such. Spanos describes this practice as inquiry grounded in metaphysics, a perception of the temporality of being from the end or from a superior position above, that either coerces or accommodates the differences that temporality disseminates. Instead, we treat the 1AC, the topic, our debating, and your deciding in time, as an indissoluble continuum. Topical politics practiced in isolation from and without acknowledgement of all of the other sites is disabling and disciplinary. They treat this topic as separate from the other topics that we've debated, all other sites within the topic, and from the extraordinary diversity of concerns facing us as students in the present socio-political and economic occasion. They specifically overdetermine politics and consequently suffer from topical amnesia and further isolate their debating into separate disciplines. At best, their topical approach symptomatically and inadequately evinces their interdisciplinarity, as Spanos explains. Since these crossovers into different disciplinary sites are incompletely realized, however, they are symptomatic manifestations rather than deliberately articulated, fully theoretical understandings of the transdisciplinary imperatives of decentering the center/capital. Interestingly, their 1AC suffers from what Foucault celebrates as specific intellectuals. They respond to the immediate, specific topical crisis and work in isolation in order to respond to it through their affirmation. They exhibit no collaboration with the specific concerns of other debaters, teams, colleges, and universities, or other debate rounds. They make no overtures to other blocks of folks outside this debate, or if they do so in the same disablingly disciplinary manner that reproduces the failure of students to respect our own dynamic force and operates instead through traditional roles or contemporary identities. Spanos incisively illustrates our struggles here today for the systematic demystification and disempowerment of the relay of the ideological binary oppositions informing the maturity/immaturity opposition. It is this inclusive opposition on which the traditional university, in behalf of the socio-political colonization, relies to inscribe the relay of mature identities, psychological, sexual, cultural, social, political, and international, in the student body, both undergraduate and graduate. A resonant youth culture disclosed students to be a body of subjected subjects. That revolutionary energy, which in the name of maturity in the binarist discourse reduces and demonizes, youth takes its proper place in the relay of classes. Workers, racial and ethnic minorities, women, gays, etc., disaffiliated by the dominant socio-political order. One of the essential tasks demanded of adversarial intellectuals is to think their relationship to students in terms of this disclosure. Their 1AC instead theorizes your decision and ballot at the end from above, as if you could sufficiently freeze the radical differences time disperses on your flow or elsewhere in order to render a decision on this debate. Rather, we argue for an interested ballot that is part of this debate. A decision from an adversarial intellectual who opposes the socio-political colonization of youth into some future, imagined world of adults, and a judge space that frees itself from traditional judge roles and that approaches our debating by resisting and subverting their metaphysical imperialism. The topic does not comprise a totalized spatial image, a field or region or domain to be comprehended, mastered, and exploited. Nor can it be affirmed in isolation from all other interested sites which link our collaborative, oppositional, intellectual, educational, pedagogical, and curricular projects. The topic occupies a related site on a continuum from contemporary debate practices through ontology and sociopolitics. The topic is not a centered, anthropological circle to be affirmed, nor does it comprise a delimited set of topical beings. Rather, the topic takes place in time, and can better be understood by reversing the metaphysical principle of principles and recognizing that differences precede identities. We must not debate the present topical occasion in the liberal, capitalist, democratic terms presented to us by the cultural, political, and debate deputies who proclaim a triumphalist, exceptionalist American discourse. Their affirmative debating challenges the status quo occasion detailed in the 1AC, but much is too easily accommodated and naturalized to debate's core curriculum, which all but guarantees its failure, and the failure of our uniquely powerful, immature university and college relay of disaffiliated voices. They treat the 1AC topical occasion as problems to be solved, rather than as part of a continuum that extends from Roman antiquity and its imperialist metaphysics through America's providentially and historically ordained mission in the planetary wilderness. Spontaneous consent to USFG, instrumentalist foreign policy, is mirrored by their praxis in this room. They treat the occasion of this debate as both post and pre-political, because they have no strategy in their 1AC for changing anything, and they treat our struggles as if our relevance emerges after we leave school. This results in a double accommodation that domesticates any of the differential polity and power we all exhibit here and now. We are absorbed into colleges and universities, which brim with excitement, so that we contain our status quo dissidents in such insular academic practices as debate, and do so to honor and glorify their respective academic missions. In so doing, we prematurely terminate the enormous differential political potentials to demolecularize and subvert American instrumentalist imperialism in all its nefarious manifestations. Vote negative to think positively topical exiles, exilic individuals, and immature, youthful students struggling against and disaffiliated from imperialist metaphysics and exceptionalist policies as a relay of affiliative and collaborative projects.
Just a quick question before Sam starts. In a world of your criticism, what would the 1AC look like? What would the 1AC do? Should do.
I mean, we have a ton of points of contestation with
Yes,
that.
just give me like what the app would do. What
Well,
would
I mean,
it
like
look
for example, it's the way that the way that you look at the topic as a spatialized image.
My question isn't what's wrong with the 1AC. My question is
Well,
what they would look like.
like those are the things that you shouldn't have done, right?
Well, no, I understand that. So what should we have done? I'm not asking a negative question, a positive one. What should have been done?
I don't know. You definitely shouldn't have done a lot of the things that we criticized. You have multiple ways of doing that. We have ways of doing that way as well.
You say in your speech that you agree with parts of the 1AC. What parts of the 1AC you agree with?
A lot of the topical research that goes into preparing for debates, like a lot of the research we believe should be included in a collaborative, active judge space. We think that that's I mean, and it's
So the
necessary to
one
look at the
has
world around us
educational
and see
merit.
what's going on.
The 1AC is educational merit, right?
Sure.
From an external standpoint.
I
Okay,
mean,
so
yeah, any perspective probably will have a fairly educational.
okay, that's fair. So under your interpretation, how would you say we order judge space, right? By saying that the judge should look at the impacts of the plan, decide
We
whether or not those
criticize the
impacts
way
are
that you look at the ballot as metaphysical, as if you could put everything that happens in this debate round as some kind of static idea of what happened,
Okay.
that looks back over the debate round.
Why
I think
doesn't-
that's an
why
imperialist
doesn't the fact
metaphysical way
that-
of thinking.
Why doesn't the fact that you can contest our framework via something like a critique, using that vehicle, disprove this argument that we are imposing legal rules on the
We
community,
think our
which seems to be
we think
incorrect.
framework should be an advantage to the ways in which you're debating.
Right, I understand that. So my question then is, why are you, who propose an alternative framework under which the judge should evaluate the debate, also not ordering the community? I don't see any difference between saying,
Our
looking at the
conception of the
impacts of the
judge
plan
space
is
is
important
one that
and
is active and part of this debate, rather than separated,
Right, and
rather
that
than
is-
all of us being separated. We
and that is
believe
more important than our
collaboration-
interpretation, right? There are reasons that should be preferred. That is an ordering of judge space. Can we agree on that?
We just think that we do think it's a better way of doing politics, but we don't
Okay,
necessarily agree
So
with that.
what's a better way of doing politics? What should we do?
Our way of not spatializing, staticizing debate. We rather think that a collaborative effort that looks at the relay of disaffiliated voices and the ways in which we can all come together in that collaborative process is going to be a better way to look at debate, and allows us to think the second term in the binary opposition of immature positively, to realize that we can actually stand up and
Well, let's
change
have
things.
a quick question, last question. You talk about minority groups and groups that are kind of not hard and successful. How does the 1AC construct or affirm those advantages?
That's not our argument. Our argument is that you separate it into disciplines the same way post-Enlightenment politics worked.
Okay, we'll take Brad. There's something going on.
The over-under on the number of chapters I'll be able to read is 3. No one thinks I can get through it. So everyone thinks I'm a lead. I think I'm gonna I might be a bit creepy though, just where you like how it feels.
I saw an interview with Ghost for sure.
Yeah. Should be interesting.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to read it too, actually. Seems like I read this series of I actually read those autobiographies of like convicted convictions. One book in particular was like the most awful thing I ever read, but also totally awesome.
Yeah.
I kind of read that book. I mean, who's edited?
I pre-ordered it on Amazon. I didn't know that they sent it. It's gonna be awesome.
Their critique is wrong. We do not dissociate ourselves from other movements or anything like that. They cannot isolate a reason as to why just because we advocate a specific policy that we disassociate ourselves from other collaborative movements. The fact that debate causes us to engage ourselves with other movements is proof the fact that when we discuss policy issues and discuss and do these sorts of research, we inevitably lead ourselves to involve ourselves in other movements. This is not an argument as to why policy debate allows us to be policymakers and make and advocate more effective policies, but rather an argument as to why we debate forums and helps us make individual assessments about what we think is right and wrong. For example, the reason that Scott Phillips is a vegetarian is because he read an animal rights affirmative and he decided that it was wrong. We can permute his alternative. There is, I don't know what his alternative is because he won't elaborate what it is. He just makes arguments about how the 1AC is wrong, but the fact that we don't prevent you from bringing in other avenues of advocacy or activism into this debate means that you can solve this argument. Another example of this would be how policy debate has led to things like the UDL, which has helped bring partnership programs with inner city school children and have formed actual movements. Also, which means that you should give me leeway on what this alternative does, and also should make them specify because we present a good framework. And our framework is that discussion of policy and through a lens of fiat is good. Is key to predictable debates. They could just change the framework in order to skirt the 1AC, destroying predictability, which internally turns all of his arguments about why he thinks the arguments he makes about why our education or research is good, because in a world of their alternative, that research, there's no incentive for that research to happen. B is that it increases competition by forcing classroom response to 1AC and research claims about governmental policies. And C is that our interpretation solves all of their exclusion offense. They can still read links based off of the plan and textual policy-based alternative. This forces stable advocacies, which prevents moving targets. And D is that the neg is the burden of rejoinder because they're reactionary. They can pick the framework most advantageous, which kills fairness. They can still read their critiques when they're apt, which solves their offense. They can even still read their critiques as long as we get to leverage the impacts to the affirmative against their criticism, which also solves all of their exclusion arguments. The impact of this argument is not that policy making is good, but rather for the love of the game. In a world where there's no fairness, people don't start. People won't enjoy debate. Debate is an activity we engage in not only because it educates us, but because the game is fun to play. And in a world where there are no rules and there is no fairness, the game is less fun because people start losing and they don't do what they expect to do when they come to debate. And discussing policy is key to education that leads to more effective discussion, and education likely no one. Leftist American cultural critiques might put their political talents to better use if they vary some of their cynicism and help force public and political possibilities. We who fancy ourselves philosophers who do well to create for ourselves a new kind of public intellectual that seeks to understand the logic of free trade agreements as well as strategic modification. This means going deep into the guts of our quotidian social institutions, grammar, pragmatic details, and intellectual glow to do aware of officials take difficult and imperfect decisions that affect other people's lives, and it means making honest attempts to truly understand how this institution actually functions in the actual world before howling about their overlooked commences. This might help us from being slapped down in debates with policy pros who lack awareness of the dogmatic subjects. And resulting framework is a precondition for debate to occur and education to occur that strived in 2000.
The mistake is thinking that consensus skills debate, we agree on generalities but not specifics, therefore we can argue about them. There can be no argument except for the premise that within a context of agreement we can argue about something if we're not communicating, if we can't agree on the topic in terms of the argument, or if we have utterly different ideas of what counts as evidence or good argument. At the very least, we must agree that something must be debated before we can debate it. One cannot have an argument about euthanasia as someone who thinks that euthanasia is a music group contest is meaningless if there's a lack of agreement about what is being contested. Resistors and debaters must have the same shared ideas and subjects and or terms of their disagreements. And predictable rules are necessary for engaging in debate in the first place, so using the resolution to divide ground is necessary to continue the debate. Bakken in 99. Particular definition situation comes to shared by the participants source the definition of what is willingly considers the relevant as well as the irrelevant. The frame comes to place by action and utterances. Participants who provide a sense that they are being taken. It does not matter whether the game or checkers play bottle caps or a piece of square that only over pennies and dimes on chalked out piece of squares. Insofar as the two players agree to play checkers, the item will be treated as exactly the same way. If one of the players can decide to deal with pennies or dimes as money, it would be breaking the rules that have been agreed upon and would place in jeopardy the continuance of the game. Any given point at which the frame of the top particularly organized their utterances so they will be relevant to the top in some way. The confusion is avoided, necessary for all participants to agree and change termination before action occurs. If this such agreement is not reached, then any action of peace belongs to a new frame of interpretation. This will be interpreted by other participants in terms of the currently prevailing frame and will perceive as irrelevant, inconsistent, in some ways disjunctive for new actions. Be perceived in response, meaningful, and shared understanding of considering what we're talking about. All participants implying in common. And so what will be says that this must be changed first. Participants must be able to communicate with one another about their intentions to change and terminate before they actually do so. And their inability to make their critique digestible to the public proves that their alternative is hopeless. Moot to 94. Schlag attempts to secure the integrity of the world against widespread delusions that attribute to virtually anyone else. The press says the paranoid confidence members of general public critique will change is some foreign in the way. Al cannot be described before Schlag when the suspicion is punished by paranoid, the critical acts themselves and described irrelevance. And advocacy legal change is followed to personal opinion formation and individual freedoms, even when we don't have our hands in the levers of power. Carlson 99. Participation in legislation can be defined as participating in culture itself, not legal order, not the point of evidence, consequential impacts gratifying. There's simply no, it's simply what mere egoism requires. It means the work itself is about can be found in the work in law, can increase freedom to itself, can place in the world with the very work of the complete externalization of subject concern or fantasy sports from the which the subject otherwise exists is necessary to consciousness, is to reach genuine philosophical knowledge, we practically lose the suspicion law does not exist. And the permutation that I made above solves the best rejecting form of contradiction puts us in a mental straitjacket in Schlag 91. The form of contradiction taken to be a killer move, but this imagine itself is resting on knowledge and the truth. These assumptions make part of discipline and solipsism. However, if truth is revealed, then the form of contradiction the more loses its fight. And their answer fails because unending deconstruction causes the impossible vision of the subject to carry on projects. You must have the be a context super free critic who is not influenced by the very social context which he says lies the heart of the indeterminacy of long within 93. Schlag value the big description, deconstruct politics provides all truth for the conclusion that when all is any must be produced with ecocentric individual increase in the push do deconstruction for the context to critic shocking sensitivities to embed in perfective construction preconditioning normative aspirations to the practice, but he has events that led to this Schlag to radicalize deconstruction by spreading the outmoded images of legal subject never with deconstructive displacement. And Spanos' rejection of humanism destroys any political project in our allies that allows the right to take over. Perkins at 93. Spanos isolates himself from posture of ultra-left purity that comes with himself from the allies. He seems ill-informed and focused on everyday work at the academy. The academy is short is a more differential competition with different Spanos allows is precisely the difference in deconstruction wants to embrace, but he wants to separate the pure belief of Spanos wants to make self-harm civilization because you don't want to build on liberalism, you can build the air. Building on air is precisely what Spanos recommended. And Spanos' theory has no historical backing, and his incoherence prevents the realization of any alternative. Bryant 97. Spanos' services thesis is supported by the assertion that in its reiteration, textual demonstration, the results is pronounced rather than analysis. He referred the same words burning hanging in the mystical gospel. Does not suggest that office science fiction games historical reality would except a set of abstract statements. Spanos lives within German agrees tries to schools counter German strategies, senses, warnings, comprehension, the abstract, and perform abstract arts against abstract objects. He simply writes a wall of language that circumscribes the academic domain, allies in his ontological project. And liberal humanism liberates more than it destroys and stops the worst oppression in history. The West struggle against communism proves this. Course no one. The initial appeal to communists reflect the Western pathology whereby intellectuals elude themselves about the non-West and standing apart from society mostly more can be said for the communist favor is that it's capable of building slave voluntary exchange of individuals without morally responsible demonstrate creative means of diverse social opinions. Such a model has been preconditioned for individualization and freedom, whereas regimes such planning to create totalitarianism worse forms of abuse power, the willingness to contain communist fight its expansion in Vietnam, the great gift American people to the planet Earth who remained in New York death camps go and remember the officers who live out their lives on pensions. And Spanos' theory has no real world implications. Lewandowski 94 Spanos holds deconstruct permanence disclosure led to disclosure one kind of support theory oriented towards emancipation from theory needs to less localize accountability with articulate means of emphatic linguistic capacity to spontaneously disclose what's more or less importantly the capacity to communicate solve problems and criticize the world.
And humanist reforms are more effective than totalizing criticisms. Good, no one level humanism offers a more coherent critique of the capitalist society. Generally steps to capitalism, the economic systems, more productive efficiencies, limit capitalist social, political, textual, conservative politics, arts, education, that's limited autonomy, imperative of the market, the attitude of price acceptance, partial critiques, more realistic, in fact, the total rejection of the capitalist society, total opposition is more readily co-opted with system because forms mirror images, power, there's a possibility of their own opposition. And just because we can't predict the future, and you should still default to the impacts in case this critique suddenly becomes a regular Spanish critique because we just can't, even though we can't predict the future with total certainty, it doesn't mean we cannot take educated guesses to solve that screws all 104. Your postmodern line of thinking leads to believe that it's harmful to strive for far side and recognition continuously history with downward asserts life still to indeterminacy acknowledge the fact that the future cannot be known without implied being attached to prepare for crisis. The fact that incorporates infallibly prevention means that we can be more vigilant warning that something characterized that becomes the result of human action shaped by decisions in the present. And ontological uncertainty doesn't preclude action, even if knowledge is contracts as it's denied reality and the contract will be still active, it's real, and our action will still solve by interacting with these contracts by no one. One can agree with Barry premise that knowledge is contrary, disagree with conclusions, obviously is impossible. Of course, knowledge is constructive. All those Newton's laws are words of a particular historical moment, and one man finally would assume the laws are inextricable from that moment. There's abundant evidence for believing that the truth of Newton's laws is independent from Newton's fine language, class education, simplified persons, different languages, cultures, and implied laws, and implies their chances of social and consequential capacity, scientists, and engineering. These historians have between knowledge, but the laws of Newtonian physics of truth, value, and values related to Newton's role, but to how the laws predict the outcomes of reliability, standard testing, and how useful they are in physical domains.
Okay, what is your interpretation of an alternative?
I don't know, because whatever your interpretation.
Well, you say that we need to like have a clear alternative. What would that mean to you?
I mean,
Something more than I don't know.
Yeah, something more than I don't know.
Okay. Is your
Like when I ask you a question, like you should be able to describe what the world, what your ideal world would be of debate, what debate would look like.
So that's what your idea of an alternative is.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, okay, you make this argument about Shively about how we need to agree to the terms of the debate before debating.
Yeah.
Why do we have to agree to your terms of debating?
All right, we have a good answer to this argument actually. Because we think that since the affirmative has to speak first, that they should be allowed to establish the premises of the debate. That's the fairest way to do it. So if you wanted to debate about
why
something,
is that fair?
Because
and why
that
should
means
fairness be a
that
standard?
right. Well, the reason fairness should be a standard, that's sort of for love of the game argument. There are two impacts to this. First, fairness is critical to.
Can debate ever be fair?
Well, no, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive towards fairness.
Why should we strive to a completely unobtainable goal when we know that everyone has ideas of certain predispositions about debate? Some people
the
can
analogy
speak
would
faster,
be like
some
some people are
theory.
better at basketball than others, but that doesn't mean you should be able to pick up the ball and run with it.
Okay, but we still, I mean, we're obviously still operating within certain rules and bounded norms. However, I guess I don't see why we should strive for fairness in a way
Right,
that
because
you
the
can
game is less
articulate how it
enjoyable.
can happen.
Well, two reasons. I was trying to explain this to you earlier. The first impact is just education, right? We read some evidence that says that the only way to provide people with incentives to do the research that you espouse and agree with in your 1NC is to establish these kind of rules, because that's what provides the incentive.
Like no research is going to happen otherwise?
Well, I mean,
Is
our
your
evidence,
intention?
yeah, our evidence says that we have to be able to discuss policy and things like that instead of more nebulous ideas about what activism is or activism means. The second impact is that it's just that fairness impact, right? We all do.
Okay.
We should delude ourselves to think
No, that's
that
cool.
we do
I wanted to
change
get
the world.
some
We do
different
it
real quick
because
too.
it's fun.
But what does the schlag evidence get you?
I don't. Which slog?
It's
the
what you read on the
permutation
permutation.
evidence. It's just you're probably going to make an argument in the blog about why it's a contradiction, and that evidence just says that it doesn't.
You're just saying that contradictions are good. Okay, and so what is the perm? How does the perm function in the round?
I mean, it's a little hard to tell you what the permutation does, and I don't know what the alternative does, but it would probably be something along the lines of integrating other avenues for activism, and integrating other coalitions into debate.
What's the text of the perm?
I mean, you don't have a text for alternative, so I don't understand how you can do it.
We claim that the 1NC is our alternative, if you want to think
so
of
the
it that way.
2AC
So
is our permutation.
excuse me?
The 2AC is our
The 2AC?
yeah.
Right.
Does anybody mind if I turn the air? Maybe like not so close.
No, that'd be great. Please.
Let's just turn off the AC.
Everyone ready?
Yep.
We agree that research, politics, and debate all have good educational benefits and are all good in and of themselves, but there is more than one way to debate. It's not fucking checkers. In fact, that's our criticism, is when you attempt to reduce debate down to a checkerboard or to a noble mathematical system which makes it predictable and controllable, is the form of metaphysical imperialism which they indict in this round. The suffers from several debilitating strategies, any of which means voting negative to engage in a political project. First, they operate in isolation from others, fighting affiliated struggle which devastates their outcomes, working inside debates as disciplinary structure and treating the debate itself as a separate structure inside a larger academic institution. Rendering these practitioners more like adversaries of each other's discourse in a non-conflictual, rarefied arena of the institutional economy than adversaries of discourse that practice the dominant culture at large. They inadvertently tend to fulfill the productive hegemonic ends of disciplinary logic and vision of mastery which constitute the sovereign subject and sovereign different disciplines. This debate does not leave the room. They do not claim any kind of advantages because they do not have any kind of politics. In fact, they inadequately do politics. They do not learn how the state operates or how American politics operates. Politics right now requires bill writing, quick protocols, making sure you get re-elected, having party politics and committees. They reduces basically politics to a two-sentence plan text, which they feed on. This is not how politics operates. This means they can get no educational benefit from it. This is also why we access the McLean evidence because it's just how we must be political, but they do not engage in kind of political discussion to stop this. A second crucial political failure is grooming us for future careers and not recognizing our immense political potential right now. We must recast this debate in our lives. Spinoza incisively informs this struggle as a systematic demystification, disempowerment of the relay of ideological binary oppositions informing maturity and immaturity opposition. Their project devalues us as students and relies upon social political colonization to inscribe the relay of mature identities, psychological, sexual, cultural, social, political, and international in the name of maturity of the binary discourse. This reduces and demonizes our revolutionary energy. Instead, use a neg ballot to advance our struggle in the relay of classes, workers, racial minorities, women, gays, etc. Disability by the dominant social political order, reducing us to predictable neo-imperialist politics, guarantees policy failure, reproduces metaphysics, and accommodates or banishes differential politics. Our political work in this debate demonstrates how we can make our debating relevant again and effective. Ideally, policymakers and citizens should consider our reasons for onto politics. Their whole notion turns us into basically tools of oppressors. They teach us that the system is inevitable and the modes of thought are always going to exist. This ensures that they reduce us to the alkalites to ensure that the teacher's legacy lives on. We need the world to remain the same, or those watchers conserve utopias and ensures disastrous failure. They construct Afghanistan as the immature region, which requires the mature U.S. to civilize order, then make them a nation state, and make them and give them the real capitalist democracy because they are trying to win the hearts and the minds of by bringing out global capitalist democracy. Colonialism and imperialism extend in a continuous relay from Roman antiquity to the present social political occasion. A metaphysical European way of thinking. Spinoza describes how this hierarchized binary logic enables the first major term to demonize the second minor subaltern term, and empowers the privileged term to represent the other as a non-being, spectral, as a kind of arbitrary threat, and that's able to subdue and prove the other and others as essential truth. Their star evidence basically trust the Middle East as a regional domain to be mastered, conquered, and made assailable so they basically can use it for its purposes. Also, their plan attempts to construct a static notion of what they do, which allows for the ballot to be basically as an input so they can freeze the round as if the round stops and the timer goes off, ignoring how the debate is moving forward radical difference. In their good hand, their CX and their planners all believe to create a Pax Americana, a forced peace by control, as if basically the youth can control Afghanistan, that people will magically not hate them anymore. Rock obviously proves this is not true. Metaphysics define the topic of politics. They treat the topic as comprehensive domain from which we select as something rather than respond to the one crisis. This metaphysical imperialism reproduces that crisis and fails disastrously. No matter how radical or topical answer Spinoza explains, an oppositional discourse that would be out of the task for resisting Pax Americana must first think subletting negation of the contradiction positively. Spinoza argues that an urgent imperative directive for our debating is to think the non-being of that belongs to the imperialist discourse of instrumentalism. The topic provides us an exquisite alternative to affirming a topical something. Affirm the topical nothing, its spectral non-being, the minor, the subaltern topic produced by the topical metaphysics. We're the only team to effectively accomplish their political project. We argue must think Afghanistan positively. This is why we're not the schlock, we're not the paranoid other that are afraid to become political or that's what we're doing. Basically the argument is that the Af keeps Afghanistan as the other, they keep it at a distance, they can be surveyed, can be mapped, can be controlled by US power. Basically we're not ever going to claim to be anti-humanism, trying to purify the humanist discourse. We're not that kind of totally criticism. In fact, Spinoza writes in 2006, they use the term post-human. It's a humanity that's demoted from the status of overlord of being. That is the corrupt use of humanism. Man is the conqueror. Man is conquering, force against the world, even against being. That is opposed to the more positive force in the existential category of care. There, Lewandowski has misread Spinoza's Heideggerian criticism. We're basically not Heideggerian destruction. That was early Spinoza, and he has made a political shift since then. America's Shadow and the current 9/11 articles are all about creating a political strategy to challenge with the Bush administration and to challenge American imperialism. Their Brian Evans also is basically indicts the is indicting of Spanish book of Moby Dick, and it is not our ontological strategy. Instead, spectral politics. Instead, Spanish writes, we must engage in both genealogy and destruction, which bears witness to the massive displacement of human lives presented by the globalization, the idea of liberal capitalist democracy, and the utter inadequacy of Western interpretation of human rights. It is not enough to engage in capitalist economics or politics or patriarchy or human rights. It is not enough to always pursue independently remain trapped within the strategic disciplinarity of the dominant discourse. The thinker and the poet must think the polyvalent manifestations of spectrality released by the consummation of the Pax Metaphysica to prepare a way for politics as adequate to the task of resisting the impending Pax Americana and of establishing a polis that precludes monopoly of evil and coupled with the reduction of being at large to a territory, planetary in scope to be conquered, compartmentalized, and administered, which justify the physical and spiritual slaughter and maiming of human life. We are not towards the criticism of capitalism, of humanism, or even of imperialism for that matter. Their core evidence is damning to them. It's not defense of liberal humanism. Instead, it is about how the U.S. was able to fight communism, which allowed for it to liquidate and exterminate the other in the guise of truth. I will draw a parallel now to how Vietnam parallels the current U.S. war on terrorism, and how we are now engaging in the Middle East as the world exploded. We would replace communism with terrorism. We attempt to eradicate the world of it. We attempt to bring the truly global capitalist democracy, and we are able to reduce the Middle East into a regional domain which we can destroy. Their call to deploy 10,000 troops to occupy Afghanistan is the glorification of American exceptionalism, justifying the U.S. intervention in order to make sure the world is safe, stable, and predictable. This is all about how all our advantages will operate. Their wild evidence presumes, basically engages in a progress metaphor, talking about how we must embrace progress in the Middle East, calling for the cultivating and civilizing of the Middle East, because it's the savage, it's the barbarians, the same strategies the United States used to engage in extermination practices against the indigenous population by saying that this is our land, which is uncivilized, it's domestic wilderness. We must colonize it, we must cultivate it, we must make it our own, we must build upon it, and by doing that, they're able to eradicate the savage, they're able to assimilate them into Western culture, and they were able to impose their view of the world upon the world. Also, failing to do both destruction and genealogy excuses atrocity. For the providentially ordained heir of the New World wilderness, genocidal rage aimed at the Pequots to manifest destiny to attempt extermination of native North America. America's history later ordained our exceptional vision of economic liberty, authorizing perfect slaughter in Dresden, Tokyo, Nagasaki, and Hiroshima, as if searing bodies from the sky were somehow less egregious than burning them in camps. Vietnam further exposed genocidal malignancy at the core of the liberal capitalist democracy. Fairness, neutrality, objectivity represent the apotheosis of American exceptionalism and disable effective resistance to neo-imperialism. Their LA Times evidence talks about how we are losing Afghanistan as if it's ours to hold. They call it a foothold, a stronghold for U.S. power, creating the Middle East as a gas station to fuel American desire. Their shyly evidence is wrong. It's not about capital T, truth, and debate. Instead, we offer an alternative, which is embrace contemporary fictions. Instead of saying we have the right way, we have the solution, we have to impose upon the world, and we embrace contemporary fictions and heuristics, which allow us to create a notion of collaboration and political strategies, which allow us to basically able to subvert the imperialism that exists in this room. Our impact is not as man leaves the room, but we criticize how they construct the metaphysical imperialism upon us all, a form of the metaphysical violence in this debate round, and they construct it as an imperialist space. Spinoza brings our strategy forward and illustrates the topical failure. It is imperative that intellectuals who oppose the United States representation and conduct in the war on terrorism retrieve the forgotten memory of Vietnam War, not simply its spectral witness to the terror of America's acceptable search and destroy mentality, also with Vietnam's special witness which refused to connect itself to America's acceptable story in Southeast Asia that now haunts America's metaphysical, epistemological, cultural, military, political project, and decidedly undecidable enemy in the Middle East. Like this debate, treat the topic as some utopian, under-theorized plans, endpoint, defines American essentials and guarantee ground is old school imperialism and territorial entitlement. Their whole notion basically is about Vietnam exposed as the benign intentions of United States imperialism or United States policies has malignant consequences. If they are not able to subdue and accommodate the forces they want, they're then able to de-differentiate the enemy. They're able to bomb the shit out of Afghanistan in order to make them follow their will. They are basically killing in the name of saving. They treat their advocacy as if they can separate it. I'm good.
Alright, first question. If we win an argument about why our interpretation of debate is inclusive and we solve that part of your criticism, assuming, making that assumption, does that mean that we solve the other part of your Spanos criticism?
No, our whole argument is not supposed
that's fair. That was just literally the only thing I needed to know. You make this argument about how there are lots of ways to debate and we constrain ourselves to one. In a world where we allow you to read any argument you want on the negative or when you're affirmative, and we just think we should be able to weigh our impacts, how is that exclusionary?
Very simply,
why are you excluding us?
That's the kind of fantastic. Well, no, we say that you can do whatever you want. However,
that's not except what we say.
Our problem is that that's not an effective political strategy to confront American exceptionalism in this room.
I understand that, but why shouldn't we get away our nuclear war impacts? Is my question. That seems
Because
to be
you don't
excluded.
actually have a plan. Argument is that kind of focus, that kind of
Right,
education
alright, so-
is inadequate to the task.
Great, okay.
And it's
No,
not.
I understand that. I understand that we're not the USFG. So wouldn't you be excluding the kind of debate that makes the assumption that we're the USFG? Wouldn't that be an exclusion of a type of
Look, we're
debate
not
and a
making
type of
an
activism?
exclusion argument. Our argument is that
Yeah,
debates
you say
about
there's lots of
our,
ways to
no,
debate,
our argument is
you
that
don't
debates about
allow
political
that.
strategies, and that you are a bad form of politics, which is inadequate to the task of creating a youth
Alright.
revolutionary culture of embracing
That's
and
fine.
challenging how metaphysical imperialism
That's
operates in the
cool.
debate room.
Totally cool. You make this argument about the United States as imperialist, and we construct the savage Afghani. Which piece of evidence constructs Afghanistan's population as savage?
No, it's your evidence about how the Middle East needs to be embraced, and you're planning to be embraced as a form of American progress, of progressing the Middle East, of Americanizing them, of bringing them liberal capitalist democracy. Arguments that
Our
parallels with
evidence-
gentrification
our
against
Montag
its use.
evidence indicates that the vast majority of Afghanis want democracy in the Middle East. That's why the majority of them voted in the 2006 democratic elections. If they want it, why shouldn't we help them get it?
Our argument is that, first, we don't believe that's necessarily true, that we
Do you have
believe
one
that
piece of evidence you say that says Afghanis don't want the plan?
no, but our argument is calling out your whole notion of the World Bank as the most expertise authority on
Right,
what every
and what's-
single person in
and
the Middle
what's
East
your
wants. That's
alternative?
absurd. You can't make those
No,
totally claims that everyone wants this.
I mean, I
That's exactly the same. They tell you
I
the
mean,
United States using
yeah.
Vietnam
I
to
mean, I
justify.
understand that. I understand. That's a reasonable
It's
point
also
of debate.
the one
But my
around
question is,
sophistication.
what alternative do you propose to figuring out what people want and helping them get that?
Exactly. Our argument is basically embracing a
So we should help
transdisciplinary,
people.
collaborative approach of embracing
Okay, how do we know what a
strategies.
collaborative approach is? How do we know what other people want in your framework?
Well, that's all that's going to be in Chris's speech, but our argument is about how we situate the judge phase as an active participant in the round as opposed to
That's fine. We're not
evaluating. It
gonna
allows
work
for them
here.
to
It's fine, it's
order
fine.
in.
That's cool. I only have like 15 seconds left. You say you control Afghanistan and Iraq proves. We do things like development assistance in Afghanistan, a place with like no oil and no like development to speak of. It's not really in the U.S.'s interest. How do you explain that?
Very simple. That's our whole argument that benign intentions have malignant consequences.
I'm sorry. Do you want me to flow this like continuing on the bottom, or do you want me like flowing in the newspaper? Do whatever you like. Whatever's easy for you.
This debate doesn't leave the room, but it does inform. But it is part of the relay that informs politics outside this room and in all of our colleges and universities and the ways in which we interact in politics. Imperialism is a way of thinking, debating, and deciding debates that renders any alternative representation of the truth in the future impossible. Neither your judge or ballot spaces nor the ways you decide are ever neutral. Disinterested inquiry invariably devolves into its opposite. So activate the spaces of your deciding and free yourselves from the traditional role from the institutional role the tradition has assigned you. We have specific offenses to their framing of the ballot when they review the round as metaphysical, as if all of the difference that time disperses can be frozen and considered as static on your ballot, as if you look at the round from above. That's an imperialist metaphysical way of thinking that is synecdochal to the politics that they practice in the 1AC. The Roman Empire produced an uneasy peace that was metaphysical, which has always been simultaneously and indissolubly an imperial political practice, and an imperial practice of thinking as such, a polyvalent practice, the end of which is enframement, colonization, a reduction of the differential human community to disposal reserve. Debating as if this debate or your ballot or regions or domains to be mastered and exploited treats us all as gas stations to fuel their competitive desire. We have our answer to the ways that they help people is that we have the best way of confronting those malignant practices and all of those kinds of manifestations. We subvert American imperialism, so even if they're right that we need to go in and help certain groups out, we have the best way of accomplishing those politics. Your ballot need not reproduce the same kind of American exceptionalism either, Spanos observes. The dominant liberal, democratic/capitalist culture's representation of the post-Cold War as the advent of peace in the New World Order must not be understood simply as the global triumph of an economic political system. It must also be understood as the global triumph of an indissolubly related ontology and spinalizing instrumentalist language. Their framework is the truth of this debate. They force their interpretation on us, just like the errant in the Middle Eastern wilderness. They attempt to civilize our debate. This exposes their benignity claims that actually have a malignant praxis in their politics. The destruction of metaphysical imperialism and a genealogy of American exceptionalism directly implicate how you decide. There's no place outside this debate or from time to which you can judge our competing political projects. This debate takes place in time. Our speeches, topic, evidence, and arguments all exist in time, and your judgment of our debating must not, as Spanos writes, wrest the object out of its existential temporal context, in the context of the lived world, in order to render it decidable and flowable. To do so, Spanos suspends, spatializes, and de-differentiates time, and thereby coerces the differences that temporality disseminates into an identical whole. They can be seen all at once, managing them like pieces, managing all the pieces of this debate like a game of chess. Synecdochal practices, for example, line-by-line refutation, metaphysical ballots, freeze time, compartmentalize being, and violently order temporality's radical difference on a flow or on your ballot. Our speeches experiment with form/content. Your ballot is inseparable from how and what we debate. Please do not try to represent the same differential politics with your ballot. Use your ballot, rather, as part of this debate. Vote negative to subvert American exceptionalist neo-imperialism. Our strategic core militates for collaboration. University practices and college debating today are recuperating their traditional mission of representing the dominant socio-political order, which according to Spanos assimilates and exploits the student body's crucially resonant heterogeneity for their use. Colleges, universities, and debate too frequently evince prejudice against the youth and the interrelated constituencies of the young. There's a practices of repressive accommodation, the colonization and domestication of the revolutionary energy of the young and their class consciousness, femininity, blackness, ethnicity, gayness, etc., in the name of normalization, resulting in the progressive inclusion of these errant minorities within a liberal framework as developmental. As Spanos argued in the 1 and C, only fully theoretical understandings of the transdisciplinary imperatives of genealogy and destruction are adequate to the task of demolecularizing imperialism and exceptionalism. The affirmative perm strategy is that symptomatic manifestation. What oppositional intellectuals instead require is the recognition of affiliative bonds between specific sites of repressed and alienated knowledge, not the division of intellectual labor invented by the disciplinary society which annuls the collective intellectual praxis, and by producing knowledge/power extends and deepens the sway of hegemony. They have no idea what our 1 and C said, or what we're even necessarily advocating, which is to not look at the topic as a totalized spatial image, but to rather affirm that exile of the topic. However they attempt to perm it, they attempt to bring it in and accommodate it because they don't know what it is. Even if their perm shifts, which I have no doubt that it will throughout this round, that's just going to prove our argument. So even in the 2AR, if they have some badass spin on what the perm means, that would still mean that we win because that argument is being. It is in time. That proves our arguments that temporality disseminates radical difference even within those certain arguments. Their perm is an imperialist strategy designed to vitiate the strength of our indictment to the politics through accommodation. They compartmentalize the 1AC as an isolated event rather than examining it genealogically. Their incompletely realized disciplinary crossover in this debate is not deliberately articulated in the 1AC, but rather only used episodically against perceived threats to their hegemonic disciplinary imposition of a singular strategy to respond to a specific crisis. They don't know what they're perming. They don't look at the topic as being in time. They look at it as a totalized spatial image, the same as your ballot. It's synecdochal to the politics that they perform, and we have to build competition in a few ways in our collaborative effort. One of the ways in which we do this is we do their politics better by affirming the topical nothing. That's a way to subvert American exceptionalist and metaphysical imperialism in this round. And that's why it necessarily has to stop here, or start here, rather, and we affirm the topical something, and we affirm the topical exile, rather. According to this considering monologic, the perm strategy accommodates all 1ACs as a disparaged second term in the binarist misrepresentation of competition. They freeze the 1AC as a static advocacy to which the negative parts can be added. They spatialize temporality by isolating fixed texts and combining them discursively through dominant metaphysical practices, like recentering the affirmative anthropologos, just like the spatialized staticized notion of Afghanistan in the 1AC and other countries that they deal with and manage. They attempt to freeze our arguments out of time as if you can manage them like pieces on a chessboard. The Schlagheart isn't going to matter in this round. They say a performative contradiction isn't bad in this round. However, they are imperialist in this room, which is our argument. We have the tactics of subverting that American exceptionalism and metaphysical imperialism, and our 1AC collaboration embraces much of the 1AC, but does so according to the mandates of genealogy and destruction as oppositional intellectuals who shatter the metaphysical coordinates of accommodated advantage neo-imperialism. Then none of us has the capital T truth. They operate as the old school of imperialism here, accommodated advantage.
First, their movements arguments. The affirmative does not exclude any particular movement. There's no isolation of a coherent argument here. We do not say that we should exclude blacks or minorities in these time. We simply say that intervening in Afghanistan is a uniquely important thing. I say reasons why it would be preferable. That'll be down below. They make the argument that we can agree that there's more than one way to debate. However, our arguments, there are no legal norms. We don't impose a legal norm upon the community that we only have to debate about a particular issue. Rather, we say that that's why you can have framework debates about contesting our policies, which allows them to have clash. Also, there are reasons why policy debate, why evaluating the policy impacts and policy debate is preferable, and specifically using this topic is preferable. We have cited a couple of warrants. The first is fairness, that they can siphon off parts of the 1AC by eliminating and ordering how we should debate. Our argument is that yes, we both order, however, the judge should ultimately determine based upon a competing interpretation type of framework, which is better allows fairness and participation in the debate community. Second is all of our evidence, all of our McLean evidence, our Vulcan evidence, and our Moots evidence all indicate that we have to have predictable discussions. We have to agree upon a pre-decided framework for debate in order to have clash in education that internally turns all of their arguments about how we need to have a coalition building and we need to have movements, because without a pre-decided and a predetermined discussion of what the topic should look like, we cannot engage those kind of conversations. Our evidence is on point in this in indicating that there are comparative reasons why you should prefer a stable topic to a nebulous alternative. Next argument we'll go for is that next argument is that debate leads to engagements, it leads to movements. This is necessarily true because they can read criticisms. Our argument is that the affirmative should have the ability to decide the ground. They can read all of their arguments on the affirmative about why we need to criticize the resolution, why we need to do those problems. Next argument they make is that Next argument is that we can be the game. That is valuable. That we don't necessarily believe should be that policy debate is necessarily good because it makes it powerful. We argue that we can use policy debate as a forum, and we don't say that we aren't necessarily policy makers. We control the levers of power, but we can argue that the game is important because policy debate is game. Now, the next argument is the permutation. That there are nebulous alternatives. We should refer to our arguments about why our two actions are not mutually exclusive. We can agree that the integration of other movements is important, and whether you can do that while implementing the plan, that would be able to solve all of their Spanos arguments, because we can agree that we should not. The plan is not simply a totalizing interpretation of determining U.S. power upon other countries. Out of the plan says that we should we should actually inform those other countries about what they probably should be doing, that the other countries would like to do. We don't isolate places of instability, rather say that the majority of Afghans want that now. Moreover, since the role of ballot is about our advocacy for our concrete scenarios over their paranoia, they did not actually lead to any action in the future, which means that all the arguments we isolate about extinction are just terminally non-unique in a world of the alternative, and you need to look at the plan and have concrete action. We can also resolve the link arguments that they make. Now you can group the Spanos and Puros, they would make a couple arguments here. First, the plan is not what Spanos assumes. We do not say that we should bomb countries, we do not say that we should put our views upon the countries about. We simply have simple corruption reform and argue that we need security forces there in order to allow that.
No. One can say no.
Right. Also, Afghanistan can say no. We need security forces there in order to allow Afghanistan to reconstruct itself. We need to prevent people like the Taliban, the individuals that are precluding the possibility of human rights and liberations in Afghanistan from attacking those individuals. We do not characterize the Afghanis as savages. Rather, we characterize the savages in Afghanistan as savages. The Taliban that preclude the possibility of individuals from actually getting freedom. Second, Spanos is ahistorical. It makes totalizing plans that cannot be transposed onto any intervention. Spanos does not apply to our specific case. That's our Bryan evidence. The third argument here is that the Perkins evidence is about how Spanos actually excludes humanism. Spanos rejects international norms. We argue that those norms are critical to solve some of the harms that I said. That without international norms, like we should respect human rights, just debate devolves into a nebulous argument about what we should do, what our individual action should take. However, we need these international norms. We need these kind of arguments in order to solve some of the harms they isolate, like the depression of individual values. Plus, humanism is necessarily key to coalition building. That's also the Perkins evidence that indicates only through humanism can we get allies on board to support our policies. Our course evidence indicates that our course evidence is comparative, indicating that the community should not eliminate that. The community does not necessarily we have to eliminate everyone. Also, our actions resolve conflicts. We have specific evidence that indicates the way in which we go about these movements is important. Our Cohen evidence indicates that humanism can't actually reform the system from within. It's preferable to a totalizing deconstruction of the system because that can result in ultimate failure. That our evidence indicates that we can reject things like capitalism and democracy promotion. That we are not necessarily that kind of a totalizing. We are not necessarily a totalizing imposition of our norms on other societies. Rather, we simply said there should be corruption reform. That security is a prerequisite to allowing the kind of things they critique. Now, the alternative fails debate. The first argument here is our Carlson evidence that indicates we can use leverage or powers for good. We don't necessarily say that debate leads to us being better policymakers, but rather that we can become that debate isn't necessarily a good form, and that if you sacrifice fairness in the debate game, that people will leave the activity. Will not necessarily leave the activity, will become less fair, which means that people will always lose specific grounds for reasons they shouldn't. That's the reason for our education that they remove our political agency and our ability to confront problems because of the nebulity of their alternatives. Second is our movement evidence indicates that normative theory is impossible to characterize. That you can't sustain it. They just say that they are a non-topical affirmation. That does not mean anything in the context of this debate round. If you can't characterize their alternative, and you cannot use their role of the ballot argument, which means you should defer to the permutation, a world where there's concrete action taken, a world where there's humanistic action taken in order to solve. Third is that if we win any of these arguments, you should prefer any of the reasons the alternative cannot solve, or any reasons why the alternative is nebulous. You should prefer the plan because the impacts are all inevitable in the world of the alternative. Not that we freeze time. However, this is not true because that would make the world of the judge literally impossible. There's no reason why debate. There's a reason why debate should be structured so the judges can evaluate those policies without being subjective. Also, you should prefer using the ballot because we've already outlined reasons why our interpretation of the is important. And also, Afghans like Afghanistan state in 2007, Afghans are even more sold than U.S. presence according to the public opinion. 82% of Afghans backed by U.S. coalition. They hope the U.S. coalition troops will help build their country and keep the peace. Also, securing life is a prerequisite to securing value. That's short into determination of value. What thought life means determination to give personal experience without life being decisions on not be made externally to ignore locations, judgments, matters about their freedom and to decide for themselves. And also, elevating other values over extinction destroys the value of life and makes extinction certain which turns their impact that shall in 82. While things like life have worth never worth above the existence of some fourth large species for particular ideology will be prepared for the wave of extinction by closing down the open and possibilities of human development.
Anything else?
Ready? There are two reasons why their political strategy fails. One, they are not political, and two, they affirm the topic in an imperialist manner. Our framework is the debate about who has the best political strategy of collaboration to confront the neo-imperialism in this room. We allow for policy debate, but the way they approach the topic is counterproductive because it creates the ballot as an endpoint, as a metaphysical stable text, which allows it to be mastered, mapped, managed, and controlled, which is how metaphysical imperialism operates. You are not a disinterested judge who merely adjudicates this round looking back from the end. To do so would be to represent the round in a metaphysical and imperialist way that inflames, colonizes, and reduces the differential human community to disposable reserve, crushing the revolutionary potential of youth in this debate. This debate takes place in time. It must be affirmed as such. Use your activated judge base to endorse the negative project of genealogy destruction to subvert exceptional neo-imperialism. They also have absolutely no justification for the role of ballot, which means we're the only team giving you a way to evaluate the round. Our argument basically is the only way they can ever win the way debate is through permutation. The permutation is merely a symptomatic afterthought, which they've identified as a threat and appeal to the imperialist logic of accommodation or banishment. They attempt to capture our advocacy, which they perceive to be a threat, through their hegemonic singular strategy, through hegemonic knowledge power. They attempt to make us into a something. They spatialize us into a fixed text, which should be brought into the center circle, studied, and taught in a manner which does not disturb the established order. Only an intentional transdisciplinary approach to the topic is capable of demolecularizing itself against imperialism. Use your ballot to vote neg and shatter the metaphysical coordinates of the accommodate or banish neo-imperial strategy. The way you can look at the permutation or even the affirmative versus the negative is basically we affirm the topic of nothing. We think the second term of the bias representation positively. We think Afghanistan, we think immaturity positively. They still keep it as a binary. They still keep them as a token other, which they perceive as a distance they really want to comment, so they can survey, so they can control Afghanistan, that they can have the power over them by sending the troops in. They can dictate what goes on. They need us to fix their mistakes with the permutation, and our alternative is not need their plan to affirm the same kind of political strategy which is needed to challenge this notions. Their whole notion basically that they have a right to is kind of settle their state colonialism, which they are able to basically accommodate themselves upon us. If they change they sever the 1AC or morph the perm, it is merely an attempt to accommodate the alternative and banish the parts of the alternative which they cannot, which they don't enjoy. This means that perm is inherently being, and that if it means they're coming to us, which is the reason why we would win. We are not a totalizing criticism of humanism, of capitalism, of imperialism. We merely, in fact, Spanos even says he rethinks humanism and he becomes post-humanist, which means that we still find value in humanism, which means all the opposites to those arguments don't apply. And their parry argument against Spanos is not applicable because it's all about an indictment of Moby Dick, which does not take into account the ontological exile, which is still a better way of affirming this debate. The debate does not leave the room, and their extinction claims are basically fucking inevitable in the status quo right now because they don't have a policy. The only impact you can evaluate in the round is going to be the metaphysical imperialism which they enact in this room. They are not political because they have inadequate politics, because they do not examine how the state or American politics operates. It means all their political education arguments they're going to try to go for are inadequate to the task of confronting how politics operates. They don't examine how American politics operates needs bills, how it requires quid pro quos, how it requires making sure you get reelected, how parties and committees, which they do not ever address because they can't examine it. And furthermore, we have a disadvantage as to why it decreases our political agency as youth. We are, instead of basically realizing we have a revolution right now, we focus on the future and how, and basically when we're in the future, we have levers on the hands of the power, then we can do something. Argument is that this is a bad way to focus. We should base our decision on what can we do right now? How can we challenge imperialism? How can we examine it in this room? The negative team, the affirmative team is merely pre-political, in which they groom us for future policy making or future tools. Our whole argument is basically this allows us to turn students into tools of the professors, which become the alkalites of what the professor's ideology is, and how they teach us, and how they ensure their tenure, and this is how all their arguments all work. We agree basically the ones we have, we should use levels of power, but how do we access that better? By taking the levers, by using our energy to embrace power. Their whole argument is security is not a prerequisite. Their argument basically is that we must examine, we must affirm the ontological exile, everything that possibly the only way to confront imperialism is not to secure the world and order the world, make it mappable and knowable, but to embrace the anxiety that's provoked from it, from unknowing. There is no reason why their whole notion of fairness and objectivity are not responsive, because they do not take into account that fairness and objectivity are not a reason why people leave debate, but it is a justification for how the United States imperialism is able to influence all over the world. They say that they have the best, most fair way of approaching the world. The liberal Catholic democracy is the capital T truth, and it is able to be deployed in a way that allows for imperialism. We have several reasons why we think that they front on topic in an imperialist manner. First, maturity. They view the Middle East and Afghanistan as an immature country which needs to be developed. It needs to become the nation state, and they attempt to impose that upon them. He even makes the argument in that speech that we don't say that all Afghans are savages, that the savages are savages, which justifies the notion of U.S. imperialism and colonization, which they're able to come in and colonize the savage and civilize the savage being, able to eradicate the evil other, which is exactly the kind of metaphysical imperialism which we indict. Also, their whole notion of the Pax Americana, their attempts to bring peace to the Middle East is the forcing of the uneasy peace, by keeping peace by having American troops there. Iraq is proves basically when we do that, it allows for that violence. They're trying to win the hearts and the minds of people in Iraq. Even if the arguments are basically in Iraq and Afghanistan can say no. But the argument basically this is the equivalent of the Bush logic that Iraq will greet us as liberators because they want democracy. They want U.S. to come in and intervene. Our argument is that it was a counterproductive strategy, and that it's what allowed for the de-differentiation and violence, and allowed for the massive bombings, the killings of millions and thousands of people in Iraq and in the U.S., which means that this kind of imperialist logic, also the whole notion of like the battle in a metaphysical manner and the progress metaphor, to civilize the militants as an errand that needs to be domesticated, needs to be controlled, and it allows for them to control in this room.
410.
The framework for evaluating the debate is not who solves imperialism better. This is extended on our fiat, and our framework arguments are we should be able to evaluate whether or not the affirmative is a good idea or a bad idea. This is the framework that's advocated in the cross-examination of the 1AC, which means he doesn't have a reason as to why his framework is better for education, better for framework, or better for imperialism, where he has not responded to any of Sam's arguments as to why our framework for evaluating the plan is better, but I'll get to that later in the debate. When he does, he makes the argument that we lead to master mapping and control. He's not extended a warrant as to why we lead to control. There are multiple reasons why Afghanistan is different than places like Iraq. We do not have oil interests in places like Afghanistan. We have no incentive to do things like develop them. Our evidence indicates that they want development, and because of that, the United States has intervened to help those things. They've conceded the plethora of arguments as to why we don't link to these. First and most importantly of which is that Afghanistan's want us there, which means that we should go there. His arguments about imperialism all assume the United States is imposing his legal norms. This is rhetoric that he actually used in these debates, but we don't impose anything on them. First of all, Afghanistan's want the plan, and second, they've conceded that Afghanistan can say no if they don't want the plan. So I don't understand what is imperialist about these arguments. Now on the permutation debate, he makes the argument how the perm fails because he captures a bad strategy, but the permutation will reject all other instances. He doesn't have any specific reasons why imperialism in the instance of Afghanistan is bad, but rather reasons why the United States exceptionalism in other instances is bad. Our argument is that we can be inclusive of these other instances. I'm not quite sure what his alternative does, but I assume it has something to do with not accepting the resolution and involving other forms of activism, which the permutation can do, and which solves these other instances of imperialism. If we win any of our arguments about why there's no link to any of the imperialism arguments, it bolsters a reason as to why we can do the permutation to reject the worst forms of imperialism. He says we try to stabilize the topic, and we try to capture their strategy because it's a threat. That's not true. He doesn't have a warrant as to why we perceive the strategy as a threat. If he wins his arguments for why imperialism, the permutation would be a reason that we have to solve for this, and if we win a reason as to why U.S. action in Afghanistan is good, it says also a reason why we should solve for that, which means that the permutation will be the best option. Now, the Spano-y thing kind of debate, he makes the argument that they think we're all positive and that we try to control Afghanistan. This is all above us, so why we don't try to control Afghanistan at all. We condition the troops, which means that Karzai can only say no, or the population can say no. They've also not answered the arguments as to why Afghanistans want us there, which means we have the only specific evidence of the round. They have conceded in their 1 and C that specificity of evidence and that research and education is critical, which is the reason why you should default to our arguments and our specific arguments about why we don't link to their generic imperialism arguments, because they've conceded that specificity of these arguments and doing research is good, and the only way to encourage that kind of research is to prefer evidence that is specific. Now, he makes arguments as to why they can affirm the same political strategy, but that would not make any sense because his argument is that they are anti-resolution, they're anti the plan. They conceded our arguments as to why the plan is critical to solvency, i.e. the United States sending troops, which is apparently imperialist, is what what is critical to solving these things, which means you cannot affirm that imperialism should happen and that it is imperialist at the same time, and he does not explain how this would work, which means you shouldn't look towards it, but we have coherently explained why the permutation would grasp both these arguments and the reason why the plan of action was good. Also, if we win our fiat debates, this shouldn't matter because you should only evaluate the plan of action. Now, extend our Spanos evidence, first extend our, I got it right here. First extend, here it is. Carlson evidence, our evidence indicates that by talking about legal challenges, even if we don't have our hands on the levers of power, that research is critical to making independent judgments and individual judgments about what we should do and what our moral judgment could be, which is critical to individual freedom, which means that even if we don't have effects beyond this room, our discussion of what the government does is critical to making informed judgments and moral judgments about what should be done. And they've also considered our Perkins evidence, which indicates that Spanos' purist ideology about what the left should encompass means that he isolates and stereotypes other intellectuals by making them seem like they're all the same thing, which internally turns their imperialism argument. They've also considered our Core's evidence, which indicates that intervention in some instances is good. Our evidence cites communism and how the communists did lots of bad things like slaughtered lots of people and tortured them and tortured them. They've conceded our Schwartz evidence and our Shell evidence, which indicates that the yardstick for what is good, it should be saving lives, because you can't evaluate what life is. You can only evaluate what life is valued at because you can only evaluate that yourself. And finally, they consider our Bryant evidence, which indicates that Spanos' theory doesn't have historical backing, which means their genealogy arguments and their genealogy links don't apply because they don't make sense. Now, Fia. First, I think our interpretation is pretty fair. We should be able to weigh the impacts to our case, which means they would only tell you there's exclusion arguments, because you can still read the same criticism. We should just be able to weigh the impacts to our affirmative as if we were the United States federal government. Not allowing us to do that or allowing the critique to overwhelm means that we would not be able to engage in our type of debate, which is inherently exclusionary, because negative would always outweigh because our impacts wouldn't matter. This is key to predict. First, this key to predictable debate leads to clash in education, which they've conceded is good. That's our McLean evidence, our Shively evidence, all their other evidence. They lead to incentive not to research because people can read the same arguments over and over. They've also conceded that it's critical. Stable guards critical to critiques, which means we get the internal into their criticism. Also, they conceded that negative is a burden of their rejoinder, which means they move the 1AC. The impact is the level of the game. They conceded that we do debate for lots of reasons, including that we enjoy it, and when you destroy fairness, that means that we can't enjoy it as much, which is a pretty substantial impact. In order to win this argument, it means the case outweighs because survival is a prerequisite. They concede these arguments. The impact is nuclear war, Central Asia, blah blah blah, terrorism, blah blah blah. Hedge. Now their arguments about imperialism, they say that we view the Middle East as immature. That's not true. We don't impose anything. They can always say no, that's above. He says that the Taliban savage. He hasn't made an argument as to why they aren't savages. Our Schwartz evidence indicates that killing people is the worst thing you can do because it takes away the ability to determine what the value of life is, which means that these people are bad people and that they should not be respected. They don't have an impact in this argument anyway. And their last argument is that we should be imposing troops a lot of violence. He concedes that troops do a lot of things like development work, which solves all of his arguments. His arguments on the fiat debate about how debate doesn't leave room and how imperialism is the room. If we win our arguments about why U.S. action is good, that turns their imperialism arguments.
This is like the sort of general frame for a lot of shit I'm going to say, so I guess I'll start with saying, I don't think you answered this argument that the plan is not an accurate representation of policy debates because it excludes things like quid pro quos and political bargains and like parties winning and so on. All this stuff is not the usual like Fort Hayes imperialism is bad, you're like mean to people and exclude us and then whine about it. This is like a much different version of the argument that I think that you're answering. And I think that you don't really answer these like link turns to your policy arguments, like you don't create accurate education as a result. They don't even say that like imperialism is bad all the time. They say that it's bad sometimes. And I think that they sort of win that it's in the abstract bad, and you win that in the case of the plan it might be good, but you don't win that you access the impact of the plan because you concede these link turns to your framework. This answers your education arguments, but importantly, I think it also makes your sort of like fairness turns your impact arguments not unique because you don't accomplish anything, and even if like people quit or it's bad education or whatever, there's no impact to that since you concede that the version of education that you yourself produce doesn't accomplish very much. I think that they win that your arguments also result in like I said, they win the sort of like general imperialism bad, even a specific imperialism okay in the case of the plan. And I think that they win that you really like answer their arguments like fairness sort of like fixes the debate in a way that feeds into imperialism. And a lot of this is like, a little bit of my personal interjection, but some of this is like totally ludicrous. Like the idea that fair debates is, a key underpinning of American military dominance is like, in the top 10 worst ideas anyone's ever had. But you like also like drop it, which is higher in the top 10 list than the idea itself. So this means that I think that they win like an impact to these arguments as well, and this sort of like answers a bunch of stuff. Your Spanos answers themselves are not. I think that you don't really answer the responses to these. Like one of your cards is about Moby Dick, and Spanos did. A good response to this is Spanos did write a serious book about Moby Dick that he uses as a metaphor for American imperialism. But you sort of concede their answers to your answers. There's also your best argument, I think, is that Spanos is kind of a dick and excludes people. But their argument is not exclusion is bad. Their argument is that the political tactic that you've used is bad, in that it excludes people only because it doesn't accomplish an aim. And so there's no impact Spanos is mean to people. Lastly, I think that they sort of have a couple of permutation answers that are not really responded to. If you come to the neg, that kind of means that they win and that their strategy is more effective than yours, and also that just that sort of permits a general tactic of accommodation. This feels weird because as I say this, I guess I put it for 4 days, mostly because you drop some technical arguments, I guess. But that's the short version of it. The last thing I was going to say is that a big chunk of the 2AR is just super defensive for no reason. There's no impact to anything except the case, which premised on you winning these fairness arguments and so on. And winning your framework arguments is premised on you winning the rest of the substantive argument that they've made anyway, really. So the case is there's a long distance to cross before the case impact is really relevant, the way that you've extended it, but there's a very short distance between point A and point B. The direct line of all your arguments are, we boost American power and cause imperialism. You read some college cards and stuff, they're just imperialism's good. At the very end of the 2AR, and by end I mean after the timer went off, you're this impact turns all their stuff. That should just been in the 2AC. You're unlikely to, you got your set of framework arguments, but you're unlikely to win, that the plan solves their impact better than they do, especially if you don't know what the alternative does. The one very stable part of what they've said is that you cause imperialism, and there's the only part of your app that is responsive to their argument is that imperialism is good. And I just thought it was a huge oversight to miss all these impact turn arguments, especially because they're their imperialism impact is it kills thousands of people, and don't get me wrong, every death is a tragedy and all that, but your impact is the end of humanity, which is obviously more significant.
Yeah, I sort of thought, I agree with that. I sort of thought that even though where you want your framework, you probably wouldn't do a whole lot where you, because especially in the 2AR, it's just this means we should be able to evaluate our impact. But I kind of think that the negative is problematizing just the truth claims that you're making sufficiently to make me highly suspicious of all of your impact claims, because they all rely on sort of the binary thinking that they're criticizing, right? Order is good, disorder is bad, stability is good, instability is bad, maturity is good, immaturity is bad. It seems there is a lot of anxiety that attends world order thinking, but I should just kind of embrace that and take a second to determine that not only positively, otherwise I authorize lots and lots of violence against the savage, which is a phrase that you all use. But yeah, more than anything, I think that your framework is probably a link to the criticism because it isolates the debating time, all the shit that the 2AR was saying. It denies the revolutionary potential of the youth, that kind of stuff, which is an argument that you all are not very responsive to. In the 2AC, it sort of seemed like you got that this was their art because you were we're not just saying that policy debate trains us to be policymakers later, but that it changes our opinion, the Scott Phillips example, etc. Then toward the end of the debate, that was lost, and they were continually what are we doing in this room, and why aren't we doing something important, And I found that to be somewhat compelling. So it seems like if they win all those arguments, then it probably, I do sort of think that they win it. Not that fairness is a justification for imperialism, but that your fairness arguments operate so as to justify imperialism, right? So I guess I should reclaim my ballot and resituate the debating time of imperialism, stuff like that. And then after I resolve, really quickly back to the if you win the framework, your case arguments, you have got these responses that are the Afghanis want the plan and stuff like that. But I think this is another example of the arguments that they're criticizing. How the hell do we know? Isn't this the same thing you said about Iraq? Who would you ask? And you're Karzai can say that the plan. It's is that really representative of the people who we're talking about? so it's like after I evaluate all those arguments in their favor, I just don't think the permutation really does much for you, right? Because I think the acts of that idea, so.
Alright, I guess I think that I agree with everything that was said. I think that I kind of I decided the framework last. I don't know if I really needed to, but I think that the main thing you need to do in this kind of debate is to impact turning a lot of your arguments. And I don't think that you assume that. I think the big thing for me on the framework, if I had to go there, would still be very easy to say that you can't access your app, which is weird for me, because I don't really think that's a very good interpretation of framework. But they're kind of maturity argument. I think there's impact to our arguments in the 2AR, just like people said, is what can we do with our futures and how can this education help us, which I think kind of denies the kind of liberatory potential of living in now and what we can do now. So I think that you need to address that argument. I think that what everyone said about imperialism and all that stuff, I think they win a case there, even if you win your framework argument, that you're probably worse. I don't know why, given the lack of kind of impact terms that y'all are going for in the 1AR, why you give them this. We don't say all Afghans are savages. We just say the savages in Afghanistan are savages. Like that's like unless you're extending the Khalzad after them, you're like fuck savages. That's like kind of ad hom that I think gets you in trouble as far as framing. I also think you need to think about how productive your argument that people in Afghanistan want the plan. I have no idea why you don't just make the argument that argument assumes that the people of Afghanistan are politically neutral. And that it would have been really easy to decide this argument if you just said imperialism and desire to eradicate the other is not unique to American politics, right? Like if the people of Afghanistan want to kill a bunch of people, that doesn't mean it's good because they're from Afghanistan, right? Like it seems like this is a really obvious framing argument. I had to I wish that had been in the 2AR. I think that for you all, that doing a better job of kind of broadening your argument to apply to the affirmatives kind of defense of the arguments, like, oh, Afghanistan wants this, and oh, everyone loves us, and there's no oil there. It's like, okay, well, there's no oil, but that doesn't mean we can kill people. You know what I mean? So I think that essentially they just win an impact turn. Yeah.
Yeah, like to echo that last sentiment, they like, a few times they were like, it's not even in our interest to intervene, we're just trying to help the Afghanis. It's like, dude, you got a fucking hedge in there. Your entire act is about instability leading to terrorist attacks.
Just seriously, just say that's good. If you're gonna like do half of it, you have to do the second half.
Yeah, I think you all should just go like either balls to the walls on framework or edge.
Just impact her and everything, because if they win the impact to the substance of their shit, then you'll probably lose framework anyway, because then it's sort of like impact her. Just like, if you're gonna say they're savages, you know, say that we should indeed kill the savages. There's good evidence, like, you know, we were winning in Vietnam, and the problem was that the peace movement crippled our military, and all this other stuff. You might as well. I mean, what are they going to say? It's imperialist. No fucking shit, it's imperialist.
If you're not going to change your 1AC in this debate, like, it's literally only helping them to read this 1AC and not
Just read a card that's like, we solve hedge, and then read the Khalzad card. You can seriously redraft in like 4 cards, you know, they're not going to be like, oh, psych, you know, Bush GA, and so just make the app like the substance of it like a minute long, and then spend the rest of the time saying like, what we did is not only good, but great, and you shouldn't try to change it. And by the way, it's a great book that makes these like, fiat distorts political education arguments. It accidentally uses language like debate, language like pretending that a policy can come into existence by fiat and so on. It's called States in the World System, I think, or the Global System, one or the other. It's by Innis Claude, INISCLAUDE, 1988.
Thanks.
You all move to
Yeah.
an award